I'm just one person.
Determined
to bring us back to zero.
I'm just one person.
Determined
to bring us back to zero.
I am just one person.
Determined to bring us back to zero.
Hey folks, welcome to this month's ZeroNow sessions. I'm Bagdasarian, the board president of ZeroNow, and welcome to the sessions Connecting the Dots, Preventing School Violence. For those of you that are new, Sessions is a forum to exchange big ideas and best practices for safer schools nationwide. Some background. So ZeroNow is a stakeholder alliance formed to drive ideas, innovation, and investment to advance school safety. As a member-based nonprofit, ZeroNow facilitates collaboration between industry, association, and education partners to foster new solutions to keep our schools safe and secure. And part of that stakeholder alliance, we launched a new member community online, which is someone referred to it as social media for school safety, but it is a platform that allows all of us, the folks that are on this webinar today, and your colleagues to be able to have discussions between sessions, to continue the discussion and to collaborate to come up with better and new ways to do that. You'll see in the chat at some point today, membership we're offering for the first year. There's no charge for the first year. And if you decide to continue, it's $100 a year for individuals. So please check out the community, and we'd love for you to be a part of the conversation. So before we get started, I just wanted to recognize our sponsors and founding partners who made this program possible. Thank you to Access Communications, Additional Corporation, OmniAlert, Johnson Controls, IACLEA, the VTV Family Outreach Foundation, NASPA, Student Affairs Administrators in Higher Education, I could say that, and Campus Safety Magazine and conferences. If you're interested in learning more about becoming a member, please visit ZeroNow.org. And now it's my honor to welcome our most distinguished panel of experts. First, we're going to start with Rick Shahe. Welcome, Rick. So Rick Shahe founded Awareity in 2004 and founded First Preventers, a 501c3 nonprofit, in 2019. Rick is a pre-incident prevention expert, author, and prevention coach to schools, organizations, and communities. And that is so critical. We want to be on the front end. We want to prevent harm. We don't want to have to respond. And Rick knows that very well. For over 20 years, Rick has been researching post-incident reports, lawsuits, and lessons learned from terrorism, violence, shootings, and developed the first preventers model to better equip people in schools to intervene, disrupt, and prevent violent acts. Welcome, Rick.
Sorry, I had to unmute myself there. Well, thanks a lot. Appreciate it.
All right. Next, we have Dr. Shahe Bagdasarian. Similar last name. I wonder if there's any connection there. Who knows? Dr. Bagdasarian is in his third year as principal at York Community High School in Elmhurst, Illinois. Prior to York, Dr. Bagdasarian served as administrator at Glenbard East High School in Lombard, Illinois for 11 years. Dr. Bagdasarian has assisted with several safety initiatives during his time as a public school administrator, including speaking at the National Bullying Conference in Orlando, Florida. Welcome, Shahe.
Thank you, and I look forward to sharing some stories here with everyone today.
And just up the road from you, Daniel Lee. Welcome, Daniel. So Daniel is a CEO and founder of Kokomo 24/7, a safety software company that offers predictive analysis for schools to prepare and take preemptive corrective actions for at-risk behavior. Before Kokomo, Daniel was a solution architect at a tier 1 consulting firm covering various verticals, especially the public safety vertical. He held many roles, including chief architect at the NYPD's Counterterrorism Bureau, FEMA, and other organizations overseeing various technologies around surveillance, data management, and predictive analysis since 2011. Welcome, Daniel.
Honored to be here. Thanks.
Well, let's get things started. And by the way, I always forget this. If you have questions for our panelists, please hit the Q&A button. We've got some questions that came in during registration, but at any time during the presentation, hit Q&A. We'll take those questions a little bit during the program. But to get started, Rick, so what exactly does it mean connecting the dots to prevent violence?
Yeah, great question, because I think a lot of times when we hear that term, like usually we hear it after something happens, like we failed to connect the dots, right? And so a lot of times I think people are looking at just the, at least according to articles and stuff like that, just the red flags or the warning signs, they kind of think about it just that way. But when I think about connecting the dots, it's really about all of that information as well, the pre-incident indicators, if you will, which could be concerning behaviors and all kinds of things, right? Also previous behaviors, which can be a predictor of future behaviors and things like that. So it's all of that, but it's also all those sources. And by sources, I mean connecting with the sources of information, because a lot of times sources have information, whether that's an individual or a system or whatever, and then getting that information to the team so they can see that as well, see the bigger picture. And then the other piece of the connecting the dots, and I can certainly go a lot deeper, I won't right now, but understand, but is the resources. And those are both internal resources, which might be a threat assessment team or a behavioral intervention team, things like that, but also external resources that might be outside of your school or outside of your organization, throughout the community, mental health experts, things like that. So it's connecting the dots is really all that information with all the sources and the resources, and being able to bring it together and see that bigger picture. So you can, if you can see the bigger picture, it's just like anything else. You can kind of get a better feel for what's going on, if there's an escalation, de-escalation, whatever, and what actions to take.
And Dan, you've done work in the LA Unified School District with connecting dots, looking for at-risk behaviors. What are some of the things that you experienced from that perspective?
Yeah, great segue. So, as a technologist, one of the things that kind of wakes me up every day is that, over the last 10 years, the technologies have advanced so much so there are certain things that can be done more, way more efficiently than, let's say 5 years ago. So there are tools out there and solutions out there and whatnot, but that is not being utilized. I think that's one of the disconnected dots that, having, these solutions and, available technologies around, it's not being, efficiently utilized, because of various reasons, budget could be one, the policy could be one, just not knowing it is one. But oftentimes that is, not knowing a solution is available there is one thing. And number two, oftentimes a lot of people think it's like sci-fi, high-tech stuff. But what we have seen is that, just doing the very basic, the data collection, managing data properly internally, in your own school or your school district, that is very easy step that can be done, and that can actually go. That's what we see as the first easiest task that is not being done. Ubiquitously out there. That's one of the things that I would like to kind of highlight.
And so we talk about connecting the dots. So what are some early warning signs of a potential assailant? Shahe, we'll direct that to you. What are some early signs from students that would cause a red flag or a concern that would cause the school to investigate or take further action?
Well, I think first and foremost, from a school perspective, is you have to be proactive, and you have to get in front of those things before you get to a point where now you have a situation. So, making sure that you have clear policies and procedures within your school, within your district, making sure that you limit entry points, making sure that students are wearing IDs, staff are wearing IDs, making sure your security personnel is trained. That's first and foremost. From there, you then look for those signs, getting to know your students. It's really important that whether you are a teacher, an aide, a maintenance person, administrator in our building, that you know your students, so you have relationships, and you can identify behaviors or things that may be odd or that may not be typical in students from a day-to-day basis. But I think our biggest source of information that we get is from our students. Having that trust built with having a good climate in your school, being able to take that information from students when something does happen. And there's different ways that we can get that information. But I think by getting that information, you're then able to act on that, and then follow through and kind of investigate a little bit more to find out what the level of threat that may be in front of you or not. So.
What are some ways that you get that information, Shahe, with your school, and Daniel and Rick, by all means, jump in if there are some other methods.
Yeah, and I saw, we have a system here. It's called Quick Tip. So students can submit a tip if there's something that's going on or we need to be made aware of. There's also, we have what's called Securely, where if a student types something that may be disturbing in our building and our network, it comes up on our computers and we can investigate that quickly. So there's some things there that we can be proactive on that front. Also, I think going back to that relationship piece with staff members, having a relationship with students, that face-to-face interaction sometimes is really beneficial too when in the proactive realm to get in front of those things. So,
Rick, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to add on to that. I think that when we talk to people, a lot of times we'll ask them, have you ever had an incident or a tragedy? Hopefully not a tragedy, but if you ever had one, did you find out after the fact that somebody else knew information, right? And almost always the answer I get is every day, seems like, right? And so that's one of the blind spots that I like to talk about when and through the research I've been doing, is that blind spot is a common one, in that pretty much every school that's ever had an incident had incident reporting options, right? Now, I'm not knocking incident reporting options one bit. All I'm saying is that typically there are a whole lot of different ones. In other words, I mean, they could go to a trusted adult, they could go to their counselor, they could go to a coach, a bus driver, a tip line like Shahe was talking about, or see something, say something, they call that. It could be a local, state, or federal level option. And so, I want to emphasize, I'm not knocking any of those instant reporting options. It's just that there's becoming so many because there's apps and text lines and phone lines and all kinds of things. A lot of times they go into silos. And that's, to me, where we need to really focus on, because that's one of the common blind spots that I see out there is we find out after the fact that people did indeed observe something and did indeed report something. It's just that report, that dot, didn't get connected with all the other dots.
Daniel.
And that's exactly what Kokomo has been doing with the LA Unified School District, second largest K-12 with a 600,000 student body and, about 70,000 employees. The type of instances, so this is exactly what they've been doing for last 11 years. They've been collecting every single instance, no matter how serious it could be just a threat on, the chat somewhere that securely, some of the software like that picks up, or it could be fighting, it could be bullying incident, and then a student shows up as a witness or victim and whatnot. They collect every single one of them. I mean, it's not as a kind of punitive purpose, but they collect the data, right? So that's why that's why we are saying that the first step is collecting the data, so that they're going. They've been doing this for over 11 years, and what they're doing is, so when you think about incident happening, let's say tomorrow, Daniel did something. Usually, I might have been involved when I was 7th grade fighting. 4th grade, maybe I had the suicidal behavior episode and whatnot. Those kind of things can actually connect the dots. Basically, in a way, I mean, if it's a school district or school with abundant resources per se, but when you are talking about school district of size of 600,000 bodies, it gets challenging to a human to detect or whatnot. And then that's one of the things why I was mentioning that there are technologies available. As long as we collect all this data and be able to, and then there's of course some red lines like privacy laws and all that. As long as we get those things over, I think there are technologies and there's a willing powers all there to be able to connect the dots. And then oftentimes what I don't see is, as Rick and mentioned, it's all siloed. It's not connected. So I think that's one of the big gaps that we see out there.
I'm sorry, and there are gaps, and there was a great study done by the U.S. Secret Service published in 2021 that talks about, they studied, I think, 67 different attempted mass violence attempts with students at schools, and most of the students had some sort of grievance. There was also bullying involved with it. So the question is, getting that information, if you understand that, how do you ingest that, and then how do you deal with that? So Shahe, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I just want to back up a little bit too, kind of what Daniel was saying with the technology. Today there is so much more technology available to schools and districts that can help support school safety and those things. But going back several years ago, not at the school I'm at now, just being proactive and having clear procedures, in place of what do you do and how do you handle these things when you get the information. We had a student who was no longer a student at our school several years ago, and we just from a phone call got information saying that he was going to do something bad to the school at graduation. So we acted quickly on that, knowing what our procedures were, and at that time at the school where I was at, we did issue a no trespass letter to the student. It was hand delivered by one of the police officers in the town. Police officer went to the home, and this student was the guardian at the home had concerns also. So the police officer asked if he could search the room, went in there and searched the bedroom and found some ammunition, bulletproof vest, and he indeed had a plan to carry out a threat to the school. This student also former student also had a manifesto of how he was going to do it, who he was going to attack, and those things. So being proactive and having that process in place as a school administrator is crucial. What do you do with that information once you get it? We have a lot of the technologies to gather that information, but then as an administrator, what are we doing with that, and what is our process? Because in that case, we followed through with a process that we had in place that led us to this student or former student could have been a real threat to students and families in our school.
Yeah, I think that was intercepted. Rick, thoughts there?
Yeah, a couple things. First of all, that's the perfect example of connecting the dots and how it can work, right? So that's fantastic. The challenge is sometimes, though, is that they're not maybe quite as simple. And I'm not trying to take away anything that you just talked about there, but I'm just saying straightforward, and you could go right through it, because sometimes those. And what I'll do is I'll kind of cite, you mentioned the INTAC, the National Threat Assessment Center, the report they did on the 67 averted ones. Well, they also did a report on 41 that were not prevented, 41 school shootings, okay? And it was interesting because out of those 41, in only 4 cases, according to the Secret Service INTAC, in only 4 cases did a threat assessment team get or be connected, if you will. Again, that's what I'm talking about. Connecting the dots as people, not just information, but connect the dots with the threat assessment team. And then in those 4 cases, they still didn't have enough information because they didn't prevent it. So again, it was kind of tucked away in a page later in the report. But to me, that's one of the most important things that we need to learn, is because that's what we're seeing over and over again is that it's the people and the process, like Shahe was talking about. You got to have the process in place. You got to have the recipe, if you will, right? And then if you have the recipe, you got to still have the ingredients and the tools to make everything happen. And so that's kind of where we see a big gap. I call them GSDs, gap, silos, and disconnects. And that's, at Awareity, that's kind of what we focus on, is bringing all the people and all the dots and everything together so the teams can actually see these things and then take action.
And Rick, I also think too, in many cases, you see schools are reactive instead of proactive to some of those things. So it's always it's not going to happen here. We're not going to have any issues here. And then something unfortunately happens, and now we have to respond or react to that. So it's important, especially for schools, to be on the proactive front on that, to make sure that you're minimizing anything that potentially could happen and that can hurt staff or students. So.
Right. And one other quick comment, I don't know, maybe we'll get to this later, but the other thing that's really happening is, the lawsuits, the amount of the numbers, 100 million for Oxford, 27 billion for Uvalde. We're seeing, those are the cases that are being brought forward. The liability is so high because a lot of times now the attorneys can go in and, I won't say super easily,
This
but
ZeroNow
fairly
program
easily
is brought
because
to you
of
with the
track
support of our
record
founding
show
partners.
that somebody else knew. And then if somebody else knew and you didn't take action, now there's negligence involved. And so, again, those are all things that are factoring into this as to why we need to kind of address that blind spot, because of, obviously we want to prevent things, but second, we want to make sure that, some of these cases, these lawsuits don't get crazy on you. So.
And Shahe, just you circle back on your comment about being proactive, and this comes up at many of these sessions, these discussions about the political aspects of school safety. We don't want to present an environment or give the perception that we have an unsafe environment because we're implementing these new technologies or these new programs, or these new protocols, and it'll never happen here. So how as a school administrator, how do you combat that? The concern from a political perspective of creating an unsafe environment because you are putting proactive measures, because after the fact you'll find unlimited funding and the priority will be the number one priority.
Yeah, and I think what's happened even up in Highland Park, just north of here, in a community that was affluent and had a lot of wealth, and that was a community that you thought would never have a shooting the way they did this summer, this tragic event. And then also Uvalde, you've seen more of that. So I think coming, and that those things happened right at the end of the school year or in the summer. So coming into the school year, the timing was right to really make sure that we kind of reinforced the procedures and not just have a plan that's on a shelf, but how is that being implemented? How are you communicating that to students, to families, to faculty? Everyone plays a role when it comes to the safety of our building. It's not just the administration, it's not our school resource officers. Everyone plays a role. So communicating and training, making sure our students understood what the rules and expectations were around safety, and understanding the why behind it. Not just saying, hey, we want you to do these things and you can't enter these doors. We had to change some of those procedures in our building this year to limit access into the building. So there were doors that students typically went in that they were no longer to go into those doors because we were limiting that access, making sure as a preventative measure that every student walking in, every individual walking into our building was either an employee or a student in our school. So, but politically, yes, it can definitely have a little bit of pushback, creating an unsafe type of environment. However, I think with the events that took place more recently, I think, from our community's perspective, is they just wanted to make sure that the building was safe for students and staff.
So Daniel, you mentioned earlier about working with LA Unified and connecting the dots with software on that. Has there been any incidents that have been averted that you're aware of in that school district?
So I think it kind of relates to what Rick brought up. The accountability and the liability it is a sensitive topic, right? So with that said, what we've been successfully doing is we literally get a comments from the district operations saying that your dashboard or the analytics. So basically what it does is it's a repository of everything, like a tips, threats, and also all the history about someone, the students from the second grade to a high school and all that is all in one spot. So they've been already being able to generate some sort of a risk assessment reports on the fly, real time. And it's literally spitting out student names. And then we talked about, it's like a prevention by intervention. If you can talk to them before they do anything else, but based on our historical analytics, the so-called predictive analysis, we can say, hey, Daniel is following this step, got into fight 2 years ago. reported as a bullet, maybe having, potentially having a suicidal ideation and whatnot. And then they can bubble that people up. And then they are actually reaching out to these students. So that's exactly some of the things that, makes me happy that we are helping them achieving that. That's the part that I'm talking about. Technologies there, as long as we connect the dots, the data's points, then we can do something like that. Wish that it could be more robust and whatnot, but as I mentioned earlier, there's some red lines like, hey, privacy, there's a FERPA, there's a HIPAA, being able to connect some other more very, useful information. There's still red lines, but they are trying their best with the data they can ingest.
There's a few questions that have come in from Q&A. And Dr. Smith, would you mind just clarifying the question? Is it important to identify what the dots represent? I'll circle back to that in a second, but just wanted to jump on a point I think Rick mentioned earlier. After an incident, it's always clear in the rearview mirror that, oh, we should have known because this happened, or Daniel was in trouble after school and was posting photographs to Instagram, and after the fact it's crystal clear, but then it's at that point it's too late. Rick, would you mind just talking a little bit about leakage and what leakage is in the world of prevention and how frequently that is the case and how that is ingested?
Yeah, leakage is it's a big deal. There's no doubt, and it's a challenge because it's scattered. At least it can be scattered in a lot of different places. I was just reading a report this morning, or I think it came out just recently, at least, about the Buffalo shooter, and how he was out on 4chan. 4chan is a social media channel where apparently a lot of the extremists like to go there and share information. But again, that's just one of hundreds or thousands of places where leakage. It could be Instagram, it could be like Parkland with YouTube videos, it's just all kinds of places. And so that's another challenge with, how do we collect those dots from the community, and not just the community, but from, social media is bigger than your community. And that's why it's important to have a way to funnel all these incident reports, if you will, that people see into a platform that people will see, right? And so that's the threat assessment team, and even route it to the right people, because like I said, when we go back and look, like you said, that's a great analogy with the rearview mirror. But rearview mirror is, it's got a blind spot too. You kind of put that little round mirror or whatever in there, or the second mirror, to help you see your blind spot, right? That's kind of what we need to do when it comes to all of our prevention efforts, is we need to address those blind spots. Because one of the things I'm starting to see, or I've seen over the years now with doing the research, is that when we also go back and look at the sort of the review mirror, if you will, and look what happened, a lot of the indicators were actually, and more of the indicators, the pre-incident indicators, were actually coming from external sources versus inside the school, meaning leakage on social media, meaning law enforcement. I mean, look at Parkland. They had been to that shooter's house over 30 times, but the school didn't know that. Okay. So we got to have a connection between law enforcement and the school. And I'm not picking on anybody here, but I'm just saying those are some of the things we've seen and learned. And it's happened not just Parkland, it's happened in a lot of cases, but like mental health, houses of worship, nonprofits, a lot of different sources of information out there that we have to tap into, who could be aware of some of that leakage.
And just to piggyback off of that, Rick, what you said, that partnership, especially when you're looking at between the school and the law enforcement, school resource officers, is so important. That is vital to, once again, ensuring that the building is safe. We have 2 school resource officers in our building, and you do see that way too often where there was no action taken as a result of information that was either provided or not provided to schools. So that collaboration is extremely important when you're talking about the safety of students.
Since you brought it up, Rick, about social media. So Jeff Kelly, one of our members, hey, Jeff, from Mutual Link, asks, please address your thoughts on the use of social media monitoring as well as facial recognition. Now, I know there are some, and Daniel, does your software do social media monitoring?
No, those are the tools, the filtering tools out there. I mean, there are many products securely, and there's a light speeds and whatnot. But oftentimes that is confined within school network. When they're searching certain things, posting something through the router installed on school ground, then you can actually filter that. But basically, you cannot do anything much at this point when whatever you do at home, right? So our software is more like a repository and then analyzing all these inputs. And one of the things could be this social network feed. And that's where the privacy kind of kicks in. The current, law and whatnot, it's just that area that, who can monitor, our, students' social media today. That's the hot topic in a sense.
Well, and the thing is, there's that human element that, this has come up in many of our discussions over the last year, is that safety is a community responsibility. It's part of the community. It's part of culture, a culture of safety at the school. And the best technology may not be able to find every little nook and cranny on social media. You mentioned 4chan. There's so many different other platforms out there. And we're discussing our last session about cultural aspects and mental health related aspects. You have individuals that are hopeless and isolated. And as humans, we need to establish community. And when you don't have community in your school with friends locally, you establish communities, it could be on the dark web, it could be online with other like-minded people that are planning similar type things, learning how to assemble and execute mass violence plans. That is a community that is being formed, unfortunately. So Rick, before I move on to the next thing, you had some thoughts on that?
Yeah, just real quick on that. As far as, that filtering software is really good. I'm certainly not knocking it. And you're right, it is limited sometimes to the internal, because you can't really do it on the outside. But one of the challenges too, and this is why we need that human input, if you will, and sometimes the translation, if you will, is that someone can say, hey, I'm going to go to a concert and it's going to be the bomb, or I'm going to go to a concert and I'm taking a bomb. Okay. Well, if the keyword is bomb, one of those was not necessarily a threat. One of those could be a threat, and it doesn't always know. So it's important that if we use that software, that indicator, if you want to call it that, gets to the right team of people who can then interpret that immediately. The other thing I'll add to that is on third parties. Like, we've had clients who have received information from an indicator, if you will, or a report from people in Canada. These are US schools. People in Canada may be on one of these social media sites that sees the information. So they see the name of the school mentioned. And you got to make it easy for external people to report things also, because if they can see that and upload a screenshot, and it gets immediately routed to the right people and funneled and everything else, now they can take action. And we've seen multiple instances of that take place with some of our clients where they received that piece of the puzzle they may not have received before, but now they were able to act on it.
And that's why, DOJ put out some grants back in 2019, and, there's a big push around the tip line, right? So that's the connection from the out there to something actionable that, this community can actually use this easy to use, accessible tip line to report. And that's gonna, that's the huge connecting the dots right there could be it. And then, there are, of course, technologies out there, there are services out there, safe to say, and, even our product has it, but, it's just rolling those things out so that the communities, parents, and students overhearing certain things, their friends are saying, be able to report without any, question. So anonymous reporting is a key thing, and then it is being mandated by many states, and the federal is doing a lot of grants around it. So that's why one of the things that we are doing to connect the dots.
And there's so many different. You mentioned, I think all three of you mentioned this, but yeah, so many different technologies, ways to get stuff in from, and it's all siloed, and breaking down those silos. So Rick, I mean, you've been doing this for a while. I mean, how do you break down those silos of information from different sources, law enforcement, school related, individual, peer related information? How do you got all these silos? How do you break those down? How do you connect them?
Yeah, great question. It's a huge challenge, no doubt. So when you've got these multidisciplinary teams, right? And so you've got these different representatives internally, different departments, and then externally, like law enforcement, mental health. Maybe it's not always the kids. It could be the adults, that are a threat also. And so it might even be things like EAP, so your employee assistance programs and things like that, or social workers and things like that. But that multidisciplinary thing, how do you bring them all together? And when the best way we've found is really through having the tools to do that, right? Because the tools can help you and I connect. Let's say, Ara, and I'm not saying we have any issues, but for this example, and let's say that we have turf war issues, or we have ego issues, or we have political issues, or we have, Daniel mentioned FERPA and HIPAA. We have privacy issues, all that kind of stuff. The key is to make sure that to break down these silos, we have to give people a way to bring things and know that they're bringing things together on this secure platform where only the team members are going to see it. So there's trust. And if there's trust, then we can start breaking down those silos. If there's encryption, so they know that it's safe to do it. If it's FERPA compliant, it's FERPA compliant, then they'll start sharing, and we start breaking down those silos, because we hear over and over again how people say, well, I can't share that information because of FERPA. And that's wrong. It's not that they can't, but it's how and who they share it with. And that's really the key. So, and tools can help facilitate that, so that it's not me having to email you, because I can't email you sensitive information. That is a problem. So we're people are using some old tools, and that's limiting them, which is then contributing to that whole silo problem. Does that make sense?
No, it does. Speaking of old tools, I can imagine having a fax line to submit threats to a school. Got to make sure you cover all your bases.
Exactly. A lot of people are just kind of stuck with some really old tools right now. And I'm not saying they're bad tools, but they're not keeping up with the challenges and the privacy and the accountability and all the legal ready documentation and that you need between the conversations and the actions taken. And that's really what we've tried to build, is this first preventers approach, because these are all of our first preventers. We need both first preventers and first responders, right? Because we'll never prevent everything. But it's kind of like, I don't know if anybody's a sports fan on here today, but I mean, you can't win the game if all you throw out there is your defense, right? You just can't win. We got to have first responders, but we got to have first preventers too.
Since you mentioned the Buffalo Bills, now Rick, so going back to first, would you mind just talking a little bit about first preventers, what that's all about, the whole model behind that?
Yeah, so it's, again, when we do the research, we find out all these different people who could have played a role and did play a role too. I mean, we're talking about successes, but we're also talking about the failures. But the whole first preventers model is really about how can we, like you said earlier, I think it was you, Ara, or maybe everybody kind of alluded to it, but it takes a community, right? In a lot of these cases. So, I just kind of, as we looked at all these things, it's like, well, you got bystanders and upstanders and all these different things. And those are all good, but they're all first preventers. They're all part of that. The threat assessment team is first preventers, the intervention team, if you will. And so what we did is basically said, well, let's make a model out of this so that we can actually address all these different entities so they don't feel like they're separate, like HR and security sometimes are kind of separate, right? But if we're all first preventers, now we can work together. So it's, if you have a football team and offense, you got linemen, you have quarterbacks, you have running backs, you have wide receivers, you have different entities, but we're all offense. And that's kind of what the first preventers is all about, is to bring that all together. And it's a complete model that I developed. I won't go into all the details, obviously, but I'm just saying, but it's a complete model that addresses that whole approach of how we can engage all these different individuals so that we can actually then, connect it. Not like, you can't connect the dots till you collect them. So we have to collect them from all those entities, right? Within all the people as well.
So just as a reminder, if you have a question for the panelists, we have about almost 15 minutes or so remaining. Please enter them in the Q&A. There are, after this, next week, when we release the replay of this, we'll have a key takeaways document that'll summarize some of the things that were covered today, links to websites and resources like the first preventers and other resources for you. So we talked about the dots, right? Here you have all the dots, and Shahe, you alluded to this earlier. You shared an experience that you had with a specific student, but in general, how can schools intervene when there's a concern? At what level do you intervene? Who gets involved when you do have a potential risk identified?
I think every building's structured differently, but having a team, administrators, school resource officers, we have deans in our building. So everyone has a role in how they respond to those situations. As the principal, I'm typically the communications person between our district office, our superintendent, our communications person. And then we have team members that are more responsible for the implementation of the plan. If we're going on a lockdown or soft lockdown or hard lockdown, those things take place in consultation with me and our school resource officers. So it's important to once again have a plan for that. Now, the reality is sometimes that plan isn't always going to be implemented the way you want it to, because it's a situation that's urgent, needs to be addressed a little bit differently, or someone maybe is not at work on a given day. So it's important to understand the whole concept of the overarching process behind how to deal with these situations. For example, if I'm the person that gets on the PA and puts the school in a soft lockdown, and I'm not here or I'm not in the building that day, who's the next person that's going to take the lead in that and make sure that those things are getting done? So it's a smooth process and we're not fumbling over roles and responsibilities. So it's important for everyone on that team, administrators, deans, school resource officers, to all understand what everyone does in order to make sure that the building is always covered appropriately in those types of situations.
Great. Let's jump and take a few of the questions that came in earlier. So Melanie Moss from the Texas Association of School Boards asks, does school-based law enforcement help in preventing school violence? Who wants to take that one?
I can speak just from my experience with having school resource officers in the building. I do think it's a proactive measure. What we typically do with our school resource officers, they're in high volume areas throughout the day. For example, the lunch periods, we have many kids in the lunchroom. We make sure that we have a school resource officer that's in the lunchroom that's visible. I do think it's a preventative measure, but you look at the other schools where they've had shootings and those things. I believe, I don't know much of the history of the school, but a lot of those schools, if not all of them, had school resource officers. So anything can happen. It's just a matter of being more proactive and limiting those things. So if something were to happen, it's going to minimize it by having the presence of a school resource officer in the building.
Yeah, I was going to say that what you just said, I mean, they are absolutely can be a big help in prevention, no doubt about it. I think in a lot of schools, you're right, did have SROs. And again, it's not knocking them. It's just that at the same time that you have them, they're not the complete prevention piece. You still have to have them engaged because, and the other thing too is like we use the butterfly effect to kind of be the funnel for everything. So if something comes into an incident reporting hotline, they put it in the butterfly. We have a butterfly icon, but the butterfly effect is one small thing can save a life, save a friend. Well, SROs are using that in a way too, because it's not easy for some kids to go up and talk to an SRO. They don't want to be seen. They don't, a snitch, all those kind of stuff gets thrown out, right? But if the SRO can say, hey, you just go click the butterfly and it gets to me, something like that. Now, all of a sudden, kids can go out and not just kids, adults too. So I think it's a combination of SROs utilizing the tools that you have and being engaged with that so that they can be the sort of the visual prevention, but also help to collect more dots, more dots, the better, right? So.
No, thanks, gentlemen. Let's see. We have a question here from Jerry Colbert from the Town of Maryland Public School District. Are anonymous tip lines helpful? Shahe, you want to take that one? Do you have one at your school?
Sure. And I will say that currently the way we have those structured, they are helpful. When they first came out, when we first implemented an anonymous tip line at my other school, the school I was at before here, which was probably 2010 or 11, somewhere around there, we did not get a lot of traffic on that tip line, and for a variety of reasons. I think back then people thought that we were tracking that. We knew who was submitting those tips. The way we have that system set up now is it is an anonymous tip line. We don't know, unless someone's putting their name to it, we don't know where that's coming from. And we have found it beneficial because it's helped us, just in the overall safety of our building, not to the level of where there could be a school shooting, but if someone's getting bullied or harassed, or there could be a potential issue somewhere, it's helped us in addressing some of those concerns. So
I would agree. I think they're critical, the anonymous, reporting line, because in some cases you're going to get that piece of the puzzle or that dot that you may not have gotten because they didn't want to come forward because out of fear, out of snitching, whatever the case may be. But the other thing I wanted to touch on is a lot of times you hear people say, I don't like them because if we get a false report, or what do you do with false reports of anonymous hotlines? Because if it's anonymous, we don't know who submitted it, right? But what I've always thought as a threat assessment professional is that you look at that as a smoke before the fire, right? So if someone's going to go out of their way to try to say, hey, Ara did this and this and this, and I don't give my name, well, the threat assessment team or intervention team or whatever they're called, they should go to Ara and say, Ara, this doesn't sound like you or whatever, and do some questions. But then at that point in time, you may say, yeah, that Rick Shaw guy has been bugging me the last month, the last week, the whatever. And so you can sometimes connect the dots. It's not perfect, but I'm just saying that, again, if someone's going out of their way trying to get someone else in trouble, that tells me there's something brewing. And we want to get started early on that versus waiting for it to continue to escalate.
I think also, too, just calibrating all that information. And when you look at in-person reporting, you look at the tip line, you look at social media, having knowledge of all those different sources of information is really, really important as well. So,
Daniel, I think you might have thought on that.
Oh, yeah. I mean, we literally help that school district roll out the anonymous reporting. And they're kind of unique because it's not going to a district ops per se or teachers and whatnot. It actually goes to the school police department. So there was another concern from, other, organizations within the organization is that, hey, is it going to burden us, tracking all that. But going back to whether it's useful or not, it is not useful if the data is just thrown away, or react, instant by instant. But if it becomes one of the sources to connect the other dots together, it is, that's, earlier we mentioned that's the bridge between what's happening outside to the school. And then as Rick said, if you collect the data and then you'll be able to see the analytics like a smoke. You see more similar things, different way of reports coming in, then you will begin to see, you'll begin to see a common name showing up or common threat showing up. That's good enough information to take an action on. So
who receives the inbound information, whether it's a tip hotline, a telephone hotline, an app? submission, a text, a tip. Who gets that? At your school, Shahe, who receives that information?
So at our school, it goes to the administration, it goes to our phones and emails, so we have that information at all times. So
The entire administration?
It goes to our deans, our assistant principal for student services and operations, and myself. So
No,
but
is that
you can program that to go to any one of, and our school resource officers, but you can program those things to go to anyone you want. So if you want your entire administration to have that, they would all have access to that.
And does that go directly to your administration, or is there some sort of filtering mechanism? So if it is just a prank or whatever,
it goes directly to us. No, and we investigate those things, whether we think it could be a prank or not. Obviously, we look into anything that comes our way. We take those types of that information seriously, and never want to say that, oh, we had that, but we never looked into it. You always want to make sure that you're looking into it, at least having the conversation, finding out if it's credible or not. So,
and how frequently do you get inbound threat reports?
Not frequent. We're very lucky. However, we do get tips that come through for other situations that may come up,
Right.
that are not related to building or mass threats to our building. So we're very fortunate in that regard. But we do get those tips that come through, daily for different things that may be on the surface. Like I said, bullying, or substance use, and those types of things. So it's a valuable tool to have. It's a valuable tool to have.
No, great, Rick. From your experience, who receives that inbound information, which then goes into like an Awareity system, for example?
Yeah, I like to use a funnel, or a smart funnel, if you will, as sort of a visual, is to say that a lot of incident reporting systems do, just like Shahe mentioned, that it'll route it to certain people based upon if it's bullying or weapons or whatever it might be. And that's fantastic. But building on that, it's not just the incident report options that do that. I mean, it could be the trusted adults. It could be a parent. It could be, they have to have a place to go also that they may not know. Or if like a text line may not have some of that functionality, but whoever gets it needs to put it into that funnel, right? So it's just a part of the process that everything needs to go into this funnel, because the funnel then is what routes it to the right team members based on if it's bullying or suicide or sexual assault or whatever it might be. And it can even include then external people. So in addition to the administration, it could include like law enforcement, it could include mental health, it could include some of these other team members of that multidisciplinary team. So that's kind of the platform that we're talking about. The First Preventers platform, if you will, is to bring all those different first preventers. And again, I'm not saying they all have access to it. It's all access rights generated, and FERPA, HIPAA, all that kind of good stuff. So.
And I just wanted to add too, for those who are the school administrators that are on here, we do receive those notifications after school hours as well. So on a Friday night at 11 o'clock or a Saturday, we do receive those. And how you respond to that is also important. When we have situations that arise or we have information, we typically do, we contact our school resource officers, work with our local police department to do some sort of wellness check, or go to the home of wherever the issue may lie, or the person the issue may lie with, so that they can follow up with parents, with the student, and once again make sure that we're covering our bases too over the weekend. It's a 24-hour a day type of deal. The phone that I have is used for school, and that's just how it is. And it comes with the territory, with the job. But it's important to also know, how do we handle those situations outside of the school day, not just during school, but when you're not in school, or when it's a weekend or a holiday. So,
man, I wish we had more time to continue this conversation. You can, but wait, here's the pitch. Go to ZeroNow.org. Join. Individuals are free for an entire year. There's a trial period, if you will, but continue the conversation there. I do want to get at least one more question in here at the most. So Janice asked, going back to the butterfly effect, Janice asks, can I get more information about usage? I'm trying to find out ways to get students to report things to us. And so the students are having a hard time reporting things to the administration. What are some ways to encourage students to report things, Rick?
Yeah, I think that, part of the butterfly effect is instead of a tip line, again, I'm not knocking tip lines at all. I'm just saying that sometimes there's an association with it. It's a snitch line is all. Again, it's not the tip line's fault. It's just the perception. When we changed with our clients, when we changed from a tip line to the butterfly effect, one small thing can save a life, save a friend, save a teacher, save a whatever. All of a sudden, the number of incident reports went up. It was just that perception thing. So to get more people to report, especially students, I think there needs to be that sort of, they want to help, not snitch, right? And they also need to know that it's secure and even anonymous, because it can be, the butterfly effect can be anonymous as well. But they also need to know, and this is one of the biggest things we've seen, or I've seen at least in some of the studies, is that people said, I did report it and nothing happened. Because if they did report it and nothing happened, all of us human beings are not necessarily motivated to continue to report things if nothing happens. And so that's one of the beauties of the accountability, is that when it gets routed to the right people, a whole team gets it, and hopefully someone on that team is taking action. And it may not be something they get back to the student, but if the student just sees that something happens, now they'll report again. So getting kids to understand that when they do report something will happen, and then also kind of switching flipping that switch from snitching to helping.
Awesome. And so I'm going to talk about sports. I'm going to do an audible here. So we typically don't, after the webinar ends, usually we have a week that goes by before we have the replay. I'm going to invite our panelists, Shahe, Rick, and Daniel, to jump on the ZeroNow community website. We're going to start a thread just as a follow-up conversation, because we had so many questions that came in before and during this. If you wouldn't mind, and the participants, if you go to zeronow.org, click on the community tab. When you register, you'll be able to participate in that. But if you wouldn't mind, just for today and at least the next 24 hours, just peeking back in there and just responding to some of the questions that came in. Because we just don't have enough time to go through all of it today. So we'll keep the conversation going. The replay will be available next week. So last things, keeping the whole sports metaphor, just go around the horn. Final thoughts from our panelists. Shahe, we'll start with you. Any final thoughts, words of wisdoms, things that you want the participants to take away from this discussion?
I think really just, like I said, being proactive and having an understanding that it is I've heard it a couple of times today, everyone, when we talk about safety of our schools, everyone is responsible for that. It's our students, it's our staff, our families, everyone has some sort of role in that. So, and it's, once again, just being proactive and understanding your policies and procedures.
Great. Daniel, final thoughts, comments, takeaways from our participants today?
Yeah, I wanted to end with, there's a 2018 Department of Education put out a report. The Federal Commission made a report on school safety report, so-called school safety report. If you look at that, even table of contents, all the safety, emergency, and whatnot, there are principles of prevent, protect, and mitigate, and then respond and recover, right? So, so if you look at the table of content, the prevent has 12 areas. Protect has 6 line items. And respond, when things already happen, there's only 1 line item. So basically, everybody understands prevention is the most important and most comprehensive. I mean, that's the way to go. And then it emphasizes it. The report shows, and we all know. So I think, instead of course, we have to protect and mitigate and respond, recover, but also put as much of effort on mental health, everything, all the 12 lines, if you look at it around prevent, is, I think, where the, the answer is that most of us are looking for. So I like to kind of point to that.
Great. Thank you, Daniel. And Rick, last but not least, of course, let's go. Final thoughts.
Yeah, it's just, I think, to get different results, in other words, to prevent versus respond, we need to do some things differently. And I think it's just kind of taking that perspective, whether it's the butterfly effect or whether it's the, there's really not a profile of an active shooter, but there is a profile of a failed prevention. And that's kind of that blind spot. So we have to look at things different and recognize that we have some blind spots and we have to address those blind spots. And the same thing kind of goes with there's a pathway to violence. But again, to have a pathway to violence, you have to have the violence. I like to look at it as a pathway to prevention, because a lot of these things, these pathways that these people were on took weeks, months, years. And we have a long period there to intervene. Whereas if it starts happening, you got seconds. And so it's much easier to do the intervention when you got the time versus trying to respond. And again, I'm not suggesting we can prevent everything. We can't. You have to have both. That's why we have to have first preventers and first responders. But that's kind of my takeaway. It's just we have to look at things a little different if we want to get these different results.
No, great. Thank you, gentlemen. Appreciate the time. And, I learned a lot today from this, obviously the importance of the community being involved with this, being able to take information and piece it together. Breaking down those silos are critical. And this is something that we're going to continue. This is not something that is over and done with today. It's something that is an ongoing challenge. So appreciate your thoughts and insights on that. Like I mentioned, please go to the ZeroNow.org, click on community. We'll continue this conversation on there. You can ask additional questions for Shahe, Rick, and Daniel. And we'll see you next month. Stay tuned for our next ZeroNow session in November. We're going to kind of work the schedule with Thanksgiving and everything. Maybe we'll do a Thanksgiving evening special. I'm sure everyone would love to join in for that. But anyway, thanks a lot, guys. We'll be done with this and have a great rest of the day. Stay safe. Take care.